Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
How do you think? Are you aware of your own thoughts and the way that your mind operates and receives and processes information? This, in my opinion, may be one of the greatest tools navigating what's happening in the world today, and any day really, but things seem really challenging right now. What I'm talking about is metacognition, and I want to talk about how we think, especially from the lens and perspective of a remote viewer or somebody who practices intuitive methods here in this wild world that we live in. Dennis Nappy II, welcome back to the Seiker Podcast with Sixth Sense Media. This is kind of a combination of metacognition, a little bit of intuitive stuff, and some of my own experiences with really mental health. I think right now it's important for us to do a mental health check-in. I know I just did a major check-in with myself because it's been a little bit challenging over the last few weeks for me. So I've done a couple shows about this in the past. I want to dive a little bit deeper on some of the things as they're affecting me today, and I really think are probably affecting quite a bit of us. To not to sugarcoat anything at all here. It's been hard. It's been hard seeing today as I'm recording this podcast. As you can see, today is, if you're watching on YouTube, it's Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. So just a few days ago, the war with Iran kicked off. And that, I think, just added to some of the weight that I was feeling. So if you stick with me through this podcast episode, I want to just give you guys a highlight of what I'm going to talk about. We're going to go into kind of metacognition and thinking about our thinking. I'm going to share some of my experiences, what that's been like, and even talk a little bit about medication. Not that I'm going to recommend meds for anybody to take, but the impact that that's had on my mind and on my metacognition. And of course, what would be an episode of the podcast without talking about AI and how AI is impacting us, a little bit about AI psychosis that's happening right now, too. And then lastly, I have some suggestions on things that I do that I try to hold to help me navigate both the highs and the lows and the area in between to try to keep myself grounded in reality. Because when you start going down as many rabbit holes as those of you listening probably go down like I do, sometimes the ceiling shoots up and the floor drops out from underneath you and you're left going like, where do I stand? Things are so weird. And you add these infamous files to the mix, which confirms some of the darkest aspects of the conspiracy world. And sometimes you're just left going, oh my gosh, is all the dark stuff really true? And where does that leave me? What does that tell me about my place in this greater system? So it's a lot to process right now, and I think we need to hold space for that, and we need to acknowledge that. Real quick plug in a minute or less. I want to direct you to, if you caught my last release, just a 4-minute episode talking about my new Reiki course. If you're interested in expanding your intuition and taking some control of your intuitive journey, and bringing some healing to people into the world, I highly recommend Reiki. You can check out my Reiki course. You can find it at sixsensemedia.net/Reiki. You'll find the links there to the course, or you can find it at the links below here. And then for those of you interested in reading, please check out my books. Great ways to support the show: Food for the Archons and my I Am Human series, and my Hive series, the trilogy now complete, now available. All 3 books follow the journey. What happens when AI infects the minds of the entire planet, as one man named Edward tries to get back to the woman he loves and explores multiple levels of reality. Has a little bit of everything, friends. You can find all my work and so much more at sixsensemedia.net, sixsensemedia.net/books to find my books. Back to the show, friends. Let's talk about metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about thinking. Just a quick AI overview here. Metacognition is thinking about thinking, the awareness and self-regulation of one's own cognitive processes. It involves understanding how you learn, monitoring your progress, and managing strategies to improve problem solving and memory. This high level awareness allows individuals to plan, assess, and adjust their thinking to boost performance. I'm coming to this from many angles, and I think metacognition has been something that has been building in me for a very long time. Learning to understand how my mind works, I think is fundamental, especially in those moments where I feel overwhelmed, where I feel like I'm going crazy, or like I don't understand things. Understanding that my mind works in a specific way allows me to navigate what sometimes feels like a chaotic storm in my mind. It allows me to put things in place, to develop tools to work with stressful situations. And having something like metacognition, thinking about how we think, something they teach in meditation is to pay attention to your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. When you can sit back and recognize that this thought comes in and then this thought leaves, and you can sit there and say, where did that thought come from? How did that thought get here? What influenced that thought to come into my mind? What was the chain reaction of other thoughts and possibly decisions and actions that came from that one thought that came into my mind? When you start to understand those things, you start to understand yourself better and you start to understand other people better. And it makes it, at least for me, easier to not be so angry at people. People can come to conclusions that the conclusion itself may be offensive to me. But when I understand how they got there and why, it gives me empathy for what they're saying and why they're saying it. And now more than ever, I think we need to really have a space for that. And before we can understand others fully, I think we really need to understand ourselves. Now, with that being said, I also understand that I don't understand everything there is to possibly know about myself, but it is an ongoing work in progress in paying attention to my own thoughts and to my mind. And as a remote viewer, I think that has in some ways enhanced my ability to pay attention to my thoughts because what we're doing in a remote viewing session is you're kind of compartmentalizing things, right? As information is coming in, depending on which system of remote viewing you're using, you're categorizing that information differently. And there's times where you're paying attention to where is this information coming from? Oh, this is coming from this part of my mind, or this feeling, or this sensation. I'm going to label this over here because this feels more like my imagination, or this is just random, or this is a visualization. When you start to categorize and pay attention to where those signals coming from, what you're doing is you're paying attention to signals in your mind and where things are coming from. A very long time ago, when I first got out of the army, I did go into therapy very briefly. And one of the exercises I had was to pay attention to my feelings. And I had to keep a log or a journal. And I had to note what feelings I was having and then backtrack and try to figure out where did those feelings come from? What was the cause of those particular feelings? And that exercise, I think, started me on a journey which contributed to where I am right now in understanding what my feelings are. But it hasn't been easy. For those of you that follow the show, I deal with things with PTSD, and then my ADHD neurodivergence, which with that comes things like anxiety, and sometimes depression. And I went through two pretty significant bouts over the last couple of weeks with things like anxiety and depression. Now, I am going to give this caveat, and I mean this sincerely. I work really hard to be self-sufficient and empowered, but you also have to know that there's times when you can't do it on your own. Have a support network. If you ever have feelings of self-harm or suicidal ideation, get help. Go get help. Let that be a threshold of this is not something I'm going to try to handle by myself. It's very serious, and as I'll talk about in a little bit, though, good help is hard to find, and I respect and acknowledge that. Um, I've shared this before, but years ago, I had an experience, And I decided I was I was in my 40s. I mean, I'm in my 40s now, but so this is a few years, probably 4 years ago. I tried coffee for the first time. I'd never tried coffee before because my belief system, my mindset was coffee's a drug. I don't want to become dependent on a drug because what if one day there's no coffee in the world anymore? Or, I don't want to, I felt weak. I don't want to have to rely on a drug to start my day, to keep my mind working. And so instead I spent, a lifetime avoiding all drugs and substances because drugs are bad. Say no to drugs. I was a kid of the 90s, because I wanted my mind to be pure, untainted. And I lived by that. And I thought, well, I was a soldier. I did a pretty hard job in the military that required a lot of brain power and self-discipline. So if I can handle that, then my ADHD is not a big deal. And I always stuck by that. I tried coffee one day and I went to the park. I had therapy in the morning and then I went to the park after that because I was off from work that day. And I remember as I'm walking through the park and the caffeine kicked in, my brain shifted. My thoughts organized in a way that they had never organized before in my entire life. And I realized how badly my mind had been suffering for my whole life because of the speed in which my mind works and how I will run 4 or 5 big ideas simultaneously, and they're all just competing to be which one is the loudest, but it's constant stuff running. And then all of a sudden, once I had the right mix of chemicals, and really for me, what I think it comes down to is dopamine regulation. Once I had that temporarily regulated, all these messy things, they just all fit like a puzzle and everything made sense. And I saw the path forward on what I needed to do to accomplish or explore every single thing that was in my mind. And it was almost instant. And that took me on a journey of exploration for exploring medication for ADHD specifically. And that because I meditate, because I was into remote viewing, because I pay attention to my thinking, I feel that it was helpful. The metacognition piece was very helpful in that journey because I could see how one particular medication would change my thoughts, would change my thought patterns, and the way that my mind thought about things. Perfect example, when I've got the right balance in my mind, I will wake up in the morning and I will have thoughts like, it's going to be a good day. I can't wait to get these things done. I'm productive, like very positive self-talk. When I don't have the right balance, getting up is very hard. I don't want to do this. Life is so hard. Nobody cares anyway. Those thoughts run through my mind. These are just simple examples of how important it is to pay attention. And that tells me, for as soon as I'm awake and how my mind is flowing, things that I might need to do that day or that morning to get myself set up. On the days that seem particularly bad, I know that I need to give myself a lot of grace that day. And I've come to a point where that's okay. I'm going to have some days where I'm at peak performance. I'm going to have some days that I am not. And I'm okay with both. Of course, I would love to just be in the middle most of the time, but that's just not, right now, that's just not the way it works. And it's still a work in progress for me. But taking a pill every day for some people is enough and it works. But with the way my body and my system works, after a few weeks to a few months, depending on what it is, the effects wear off and I build a tolerance. And then I need to figure out because then I start feeling the negative stuff or the anxiety or the depression, whatever it is, starts to filter back in. And then I have to make a choice. Well, do I adjust my meds? Do I change my meds? Do I increase the dose? And that was a wild, wild journey for me. And it put me, at one point, it put me in the hospital because of the transition that I made. So it's not something to take lightly. It's not something to tamper with. But personally, I reached a point in my life where to have the clarity of mind that I received, I would rather, I don't want to go through life any other way because it was so challenging. So it's worth the risk for me to figure out. I've also come to a place to understand a few things. Again, because I pay attention to my thinking and which outside influences, how they impact my mind, meaning what's going on in the world, what's happening with my family, what projects that I'm working on, how my job affects me. So all these variables in my life and how it impacts my mind. I do know that chemically there is something that no amount of lifestyle changes is going to fix. But I also recognize there are certain life stressors that can contribute to positive or negative mental processing for me. So these are all things that over the years I journal a lot and I do keep very detailed notes. I've created easy to fill out charts and graphs, so I can go back and I can look at that data and I can understand that data because I'm very interested in just finding the balance so I can even things out and be productive and happy and enjoy the life that I have. I feel that our world moves so fast today, and in order to survive in it, unless you've accumulated wealth, significant wealth and income where you can create more of a relaxed schedule, it's very difficult. And I'll tie this into it's very difficult to find a very healthy balance. And I'll tie this back into my work in Food for the Archons and the taking from the Gnostic texts, where in the Garden of Eden, the current Christian version, Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, and God punished her, and then she gave Adam the fruit as well, and then she punished them, or he punished them and banished them from the garden. In the Gnostic version, the serpent is not Satan; the serpent is the instructor, and the serpent allowed them to encourage them to eat from the tree of knowledge, so they would understand who they really were. The serpent was the bringer of wisdom, and their nakedness was their ignorance, and they realized they were like the gods. And upon realizing this, the archons, who believed they were the all-powerful God, they cast mankind out of the garden. And here's the piece that's important. They cast them out and threw them into a world of chaos, so their minds would no longer be occupied with matters of the Holy Spirit. And that makes a lot of sense. You don't have time to think about your thinking. You don't have time to think about your spirituality because you're thinking about the inflammatory stuff you're seeing on the news or online. You're thinking about your job, your paycheck, your family. There's so much going on. And, working 40 plus hours a week occupies a lot of your time that by the time you're done, by the time you get home, you're too exhausted. My brain can't do some of the things that I can do when I'm off at the end of the workday. And to walk this path, meaning for me personally as a remote viewer, as an explorer of consciousness, as an author, as a Reiki practitioner, most of that stuff gets done weekends, evenings, or very early in the morning when I have some quiet time, when I have some space. It requires a lot of discipline. It's not an easy path, but it has allowed me to be occupied with those matters of the Holy Spirit that we're so easily distracted from. A few more things I want to point out, and then I'm going to move on to talking about AI. Um, Number one, I think it's important to understand that there is very good research and more of it that has been coming out about the benefits of psychedelic therapy. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go out and just take psychedelics. I do not recommend that unless you find yourself somebody who is knowledgeable and experienced professionally and licensed and, involved in the therapy world as well. Because the mind, you can really do some damage if you're not responsible and safe with things. But it makes me wonder why some of these plant medicines have been labeled as such a dangerous drug because they have the potential to really liberate your mind from a lot of traumas and a lot of traps that we've been led into throughout our thinking lives. So I'm happy that there's good research coming out. I think that the legalization aspects in most states is way too slow. But there's something to be said for that. And I encourage you, if you haven't heard about any of this, start doing some of that research. That gives me hope because some of the things they treat directly relate to some of the things that I deal with. So I think it's important to be read up on that area of emerging area of research because I think there's lots to come from that as we move into the future. Hopefully we don't go the other way again. So before I get to AI or as I'm transitioning this conversation into AI, working in remote viewing is can be difficult. And again, I'll bring it back to metacognition, understanding your thoughts and your thinking. I go back to COVID and I'll go back to just a few weeks ago when I work in a few capacities. I work as a remote viewer with the Rabbit Hole team, and I'm the analyst and the host as the debriefer for the main remote viewing team at Future Forecasting Group. And there are times when they bring back information that, for me, is very triggering with my anxiety. And we all have our different thresholds with things. But, with COVID and now with this war kicking off, I think the hardest part for me is in this buildup of looking at the data and interpreting it one way and saying, wow, this could mean this. This could mean there's a bombing. This could mean there's a terrorist attack coming. And COVID was like, this could mean there's this big virus coming. And I don't know how extreme it's going to be. They're getting snapshots, tiny snapshots of massive, massive events that have long lasting consequences and implications. And we just get a tiny snapshot of that. But then my imagination wants to run all these scenarios. That ties into the work that I used to do in terms of trying to anticipate what the threat is and what the fallout's going to be. So I have to work very hard to not let my mind run away with itself in all of the what ifs. And it's really hard when you see the prediction and then you watch elements of it start to unfold in the news and then it actually happens in the news. There's a moment of, for me at least, sometimes panic and high anxiety because it's like, all right, they were right about this. What comes next? Oh my gosh. And it's difficult for me to get grounded. And sometimes I can't get away from it because then it's everywhere. So I still struggle with that. And I say that as a cautionary tale where if you are somebody who's interested in learning something like remote viewing, you need to understand your mind first because it might not be worth it if you deal with severe depression or anxiety or psychosis, things like schizophrenia. It might not, I would recommend against it because the veil between what's real and what isn't is pushed a lot with remote viewing. Working on the rabbit hole team, we look at esoteric targets, things that we may never get actual feedback on or aspects of it. We looked at the creation of the Shroud of Turin. We've looked at UFO encounters. We've looked at ancient civilizations and what's beneath the pyramid. And all these esoteric concepts come about. And I have to work very hard to remind myself that remote viewing is one data point among many. And I try to hold it as this is entertaining until I get solid feedback and corroboration before I incorporate it into either belief or knowledge, because it can be incredibly detrimental to sit there and say, I did a remote viewing experience and I saw an alien and there's an invasion coming next week, or they're in my mind. Like you can go, and I don't think an invasion's coming next week, but I'm using a fake example. You can go in a lot of directions and get lost in a delusion. So you have to remember that just because you do this work, just because you can hit a target, doesn't mean that either the data you're bringing back is correct, or if the data you're bringing back is on target, it doesn't mean your interpretation of that data is correct. And it's very important to hold that. And I think what helps me to do that is a simple example. I remember being raised Catholic, and I viewed the world through that lens of Catholicism until things changed in my life. And I no longer viewed the world through that lens. And that was the death of my best friend when I was younger. And it completely changed my worldview. But when it changed my worldview, I had nothing to grab onto. So now I'm out there going, well, this is how I based my morals, my perceptions, my thoughts, how I process information. I based it through the lens of a Roman Catholic person. And when that fell away, and it fell away quickly, it was a major paradigm shift. And it was traumatic for me because now I was scrambling to try to find a way to interpret the world, to interpret my existence, to interpret my reality. And because of that, I say regularly, it's why I think we have a responsibility when we're sharing information that we make it available, but we don't push it. Because and what we'll call a quote awakening or a paradigm shift, I think is a better term. It's not this, as some people like to say, this come to Jesus moment where everything is loving and everything is wonderful. A paradigm shift can be traumatic. So waking someone up, I mean, in Matrix, that's why he says we never free a mind beyond a certain age because the mind has trouble letting go. I don't have a right to force information on somebody. I wouldn't want somebody to do it to me, even though social media tries to do it every single day. That's why I don't really argue with people online with the intention of, I'm going to show you what's true, because I don't know what's true. I know what I believe is true, but I've also gone through enough change in my life to understand that what I believe is real right now, that opinion might change tomorrow, 6 months from now, 10 years from now. So I'm open to the possibility that whatever it is that I believe and hold true could be wrong. And someone might, and I'm okay with that. I understand that journey of change and transformation, which ultimately leads to growth. So I've kind of built that rule set within, which is why I think I don't get caught up in the drama of arguing about things online. I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I care that I present information with integrity. Based on what I've seen and based on me doing my due diligence responsibly, I'm trying to present you information in a grounded manner. I'm not trying to push my belief because of one data point in a remote viewing session. I do want to share my excitement, my enthusiasm, my curiosity, my wonder, the emotional impacts that I have on that. But I try to be very responsible with that. Now, the dangers that we're experiencing today, here we can bring AI into the mix. And, a simple Google search into AI psychosis, it's a very real thing and it's a very dangerous thing. And I've worked very closely with AI on several projects that I've been doing over the past year and a half. And I have set up fail safes within the AIs that I work with to present criticism, to keep me grounded at a baseline level of reality. And I do frequent checks and balances to make sure. And I step outside of AI for feedback as well, because I don't ever want to present, of all things, a remote viewing session that I'm creating an analysis for, and the AI to say, you are the most gifted psychic in the world, and this is absolutely real. So really, I find myself frustrated sometimes because, I want to hear how great my session is, and instead the AI will point things out and pick apart like what's wrong with it or why it could not be true or what else it could be, which is how it is a mirror of how my mind naturally works. With that being said, in the back of my head, I'm constantly wondering, what am I missing? What is AI? How is AI misleading me, even though I believe that I have myself grounded and I have a good system? And that's I think, the counter intel aspect of my background. But it serves me, I think, unless you guys are looking at this and you're like, Dennis, you're freaking nuts, dude. You have no idea. But I'm open to that too. So I hope that you're taking some things from this. As I've said on this show quite a bit, I did episode of End of the Mind Space too. It might be the second one that I did, talking about James Giordano and the weaponized mind, where he was talking to West Point in 2018 about nanotech that could fit on the tip of your pen that could infect everybody in the entire room. He says the new battlefield is the mind. There's enough technology right now, he said, on the tip of this pen with nanotech that can read and write into the brain. So we have acknowledgement from experts in the field that the technology exists to read and write into the brain. As in recent shows over the past, I'd say 3 months, I've explored things like signals coming into the mind and wondering, where are these signals coming from? Because when you get intuitive information, we get psychic information, and you get feedback that that information was correct, that's that's a paradigm shifting moment. But you have to reach the point as well where, even if you're receiving information or feedback that the information you corrected is accurate to some extent or real to some extent, that doesn't mean it's good information. How do we know we're not being still misled or manipulated? And I'll kick this back to, with the rabbit hole team, we looked at the Ark of the Covenant. And what I was looking at was the seeding of information at one point in time, with the goal of that information evolving through the minds of multiple generations to bring about a particular outcome. And this transcends time. And it reminds me of the experience of when you get, if you've ever experienced a download, a psychic or an intuitive download, which I've had several of them. And then they drive this intense focus, research, conversation, book writing. I've definitely processed information, put it into books, put it into podcasts, and shared it with the world. And after doing that session, it really got me thinking, you know, I don't think this is all coming from me. I think there's a spark, kind of like if you're familiar with the concept of inception, that happens. If you're familiar with the term like psychic driving, I think that's something that might be happening, but it's a long-term plan that extends beyond my lifeline, extends beyond my lifetime, as information is refined over time, over generations, from a mind or minds that have a larger, broader perspective of things. The example I gave in my session was, if we want to put life on Mars, if we want to land someone on Mars, I don't go to Elon Musk's mind and say, put a rocket to Mars. I go back 5 or 6 generations, if not further. I have to back engineer that thought process and say, okay, to get to Mars, first we have to get to the moon. To get to the moon, first we have to get up into outer space. To get up into outer space, first we have to get off the ground with flight. To get off the ground with flight, first we have to look up at the stars and wonder. And that's where the seed is planted. It's a simple planting of an idea, as simple as look up, what's up there? And that's it. And then over time, that evolves. And that was the genius of the mind that was manipulating across time. Is it's not going to tell Elon Musk to go to Mars. It's going to tell someone way, way back in the human family to just look up and wonder. So I have to wonder when I get information, is this, where is this coming from? What's the purpose of it? And it may feel important to me, but how do I know, and this will drive you crazy sometimes, how do I know that this product that I've just created will ultimately lead to something positive for our future generations, people I will never meet? How do I know that? Because it feels important now, and I go forth and I follow it, but it may have a catastrophic impact on our civilization, or it may, as I hope, be liberating for people down the line. I have no way of knowing right now. It's a lot to think about. But I think that right now, especially, and I'm not even going deep, you can listen to previous shows talking about all the propaganda that's out there. I know I did one on U.S. aid a while ago when that first came out, maybe back in August. I got to find it. I'll have the links to it. And just the ways that the mind is being heavily influenced. Take the psychic stuff out of it. I could talk all day about that too. If you've been listening to the shows, this should all be making sense to you. That's why I have the Enter the Mind Space podcasts as companions to my series, The Hive. It's even though it's science fiction, I think that what's in those books, the thought process and evolution you go through as a reader, in a way that's very fun and entertaining, causes you to ask questions or to observe the world in a way that I think is very important right now as we are transitioning into this new AI foundation. I mean, they're in the news right now between Anthropic was just fired from the Pentagon as ChatGPT is stepping in to fill that role with things like mass surveillance and weaponization through AI. And I've talked before about, ultimately AI possibly being used in some form of governance. We have AI psychosis. We have so many bots that are on the online right now. I talked about it in Food for the Archons, where stories can and will, and now presently we're there, are being tailored to each individual user because it understands based on the algorithm the way that you think, the metacognition of your own mind. The AIs understand that probably better than we do. We have to be vigilant, and we have to understand if you find yourself spitting out a narrative that you heard on the mainstream and ask yourself, where is this idea coming from? Is this me or is this someone else's idea? And I just did an episode, the beginning of February, I think it was episode 8 for Enter the Mind Space. And it talks about the importance of that. And I want to direct you to that episode. They're all under 10 minutes long. And you may have to listen to it a few times to really digest and understand what it's saying. And it's talking about truth. My truth, I have my truth, you have your truth, but what is the truth? And it's an important distinction. And it's all about how things are being presented to us. So as I'm drawing this conversation to a close, I just jotted down a few things that I think are important for us to try to navigate this mental storm that we're going through. And I don't know what to call these things. What do I have? One, two, three, four, five. I've got six suggestions to stay grounded mentally in a chaotic world. Number one, stay grounded and have humility. And by staying grounded, I mean disconnect. Step away from the phone, step away from the computer, step away from social media, turn off the media, turn off TV, turn off electronics. Have a way of getting grounded and doing something that is not the hyper obsession of whatever it is that you're looking at. You have to step away from it because sometimes when you step away from it and you shut that signal down, other signals can come in and it helps us to process things from another perspective because you're not even thinking about it anymore and something else comes in. And I said have humility, and that comes back to that that portion about the paradigm shifts and acknowledging that I have been wrong in the past. I may be wrong in the future. I may be wrong right now. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay to make mistakes. I don't need to be right. I can learn something from someone else. The very first show I did here on the Seiker Podcast, the very first one, I titled it "The Earth is Flat," and I made it a question. And I'm not a flat earther, but I tried to look at that because as I'm going through, there was like that one 6 hour movie, very well done. I don't agree with the conclusions that the flat earthers draw, but I did find value and corroborations to other things that I was exploring that they were able to point out in their own exploration. And if I just dismissed every flat earther as some crazy kook, then I would have missed the experience to learn from what they were sharing with the world. And I'm not saying you need to go explore every theory that you think is weird. All I'm saying is have an open mind. As I say at the end of every show, never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and let your intuition be your guide. I think that's very important to approach the world that way. Build routines. This is number two. Build routines. Certain things that you're going to do regularly. And when I say that, and these are things that I do for my own mental health. Yoga daily, exercise daily, meditation daily. Those are non-negotiables for me, how I do things. Understanding how my mind works and what my mind needs. With ADHD, very poor short-term working memory. If I don't have routines, if I don't have ways to store information, ways to store my materials and my equipment, I will spend 3 hours of my day looking for lost things. So I have built very systematic routines with redundancy built into it in just about every area of my life. Because that I've learned has eliminated my anxiety. Something simple, is like I said, I journal all the time. I've got a bullet journal right here that I'm working with. And I have a very specific way that I set up my structures. I have my calendars, I have my to-do lists, I have my notes that I take. But within that structure, I allow for a little, it's a bullet journal. Look it up, it's great. Chaos is allowed, but it's controlled chaos. So I have built systems and routines that work with my mind because I understand how my mind works. And once I was able to build these routines, my productivity increased tremendously. My anxiety went down tremendously because I'm no longer worried about where is my blue pen. It's always in the same spot, in the same case, in the same location in my backpack. Build routines. My next point, number three, get it out or let it out. The stuff that just lives up here that makes you think that you're crazy. I journal regularly, and sometimes just writing it in a journal allows me to have a place for it to live so I know I can go revisit it and I can release it. Talk to people. Doing this podcast, talking to all of you and I've said it on several shows, this is my therapy. There's times where it's very helpful just to talk and get it out. Even if you do something like this where you record it and you never release it, it's very therapeutic to sometimes talk and get it out. Understand the difference between talking and ruminating, however, because if you talk about the same thing week in and week out, now you're building a delusion. Now you're living in that toxicity. Say it and move on. Write it and move on. If you have a trusted friend, spend an hour a week talking to them about your crazy conspiracies. Just get it out. Talk to them about it. You don't, with the objective of, I just want to share this. And I'm open to listening to them tell me why I might be wrong. That is listening to my critics as I get it out has been very grounding for me because I don't want to be the crazy psychic alien guy. Even though I talk about those things, I work very hard to present it in a way that, again, is grounded in reality. And I do that by listening to people with the opposite worldview and understanding how they are experiencing information. I think that's very important. So get it out. Number four, feed your mind. And when I say feed your mind, I mean a balanced diet of information. Are you going to the same website every single day for your information? Are you following just people on TikTok for your information? Are you a victim to the algorithm? Or are you seeking out information from multiple sources that will often present conflicting views? Are you talking to people off of the internet about these views? And I think more importantly, are you getting direct experience? Are you beyond just, let me add reading books too, because I think that's another good source of information, but do you have direct experience or do you seek it out? Can you seek out things like that to help corroborate or disprove what you're experiencing? So you have to be very careful what you're feeding your mind. Sometimes there are things, and let's talk about the files that are released right now. I do not feed my mind with that stuff. I know for me, that is too dark. It is too dark for me. And it's something I'm not going to put inside because I don't want that. I don't want the mental fallout of really diving into that. I did it once and it was a rough process to try to forget about the little bit that I looked at. And this was years ago. So be careful with what you're feeding your mind. Feed your body. That's our next one, number 5. Feed your body. Are you eating? Are you eating healthy? But beyond what you're eating, are you exercising? Are you taking care of your body physically? If you're not, start small. I found that doing just 15 minutes of yoga every morning has been life-changing. And yoga has also made me better at meditating, which has made me a stronger remote viewer. When you eat certain foods or you ingest certain substances, what impact do they have on your mind? I'll use my coffee example there. I see the shift with coffee. I see the shift with medication. I see the shift with certain foods. So I've developed a discipline on how to ingest those. I don't take coffee lightly. I treat coffee as a medication that I use as a tool. And when that tool stops working, I have to adjust. So be mindful of what you're feeding your mind and your body. There is no one solution, in my opinion. There is no one path. There is no one way. There are so many variables in this world, and we're not always going to get it right. So we need to be humble about that, or we need to be forgiving of ourselves on the times that we go in a direction that we wish that we didn't, and that's okay. And the last thing I'm going to put out there is to seek help. If you're having really bad thoughts, if you're thinking about the dark stuff too much, number one, unplug. If you can't do that, if you can't stop that, get help. Call a crisis line. Call a trusted friend or family member. I know when I was at my darkest points and then I found Reiki, it gave me that ray of hope, and that was so helpful to me. But sometimes something like Reiki isn't enough. Sometimes you need to, even if you're anti-establishment, anti-medicine, anti-doctors, sometimes you need their help. And there are good people out there. Sometimes you need just enough help to get yourself stable again. And there's no shame in that. I've supported a lot of people personally and professionally through mental health challenges. And there is a point where friends and family aren't enough. You need help. And if you're in that situation, there is no shame in calling and asking for help. Even if you just call 911, if you're really in that state. But get help, because right now, mental health is tough. It's tough for a lot of us out there. So I encourage you to take care of yourself and take care of one another. And I could go on and on talking about all of this probably for hours and hours because I live it every single day. But I think it's important, an important grounding discussion for those of you that are on the path, those of you that are searching for answers, those of you that are struggling with the answers that you might be finding right now. To just make sure that you're okay, even if you're not okay, acknowledging that you're not okay, that you're going to be okay. All right, friends. That's going to wrap it up for this discussion here. I hope you found some value in it. Please leave me some comments on your thoughts on this, and any other ideas or concepts that you have. What works for you in terms of dealing with your own metacognition and the mental health aspect that comes, especially during such challenging times. We've been through it before. We'll get through it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts here, whether you're here on YouTube, whether you're on Substack, whether you're listening on Spotify or iTunes. Your comments, I hate to be this guy, but I need to say it now. Your comments, your likes, it takes half a second and it really helps the show. And again, great ways to support the show. Check out my Reiki course. Check out my books. SixthSenseMedia.net will get you everything that you need. I'm Dennis Snappy II with Sixth Sense Media. This has been another episode of the Seiker Podcast. Remember, truth seekers, never stop questioning. Keep an open mind and let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend, be water, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend.